In April 1817, a woman appeared in the English countryside wearing clothes no one recognized. She spoke a language no one understood. She carried no money, no documents, no explanation. When asked who she was, she drew symbols in the dirt, strange characters, foreign script, and then she pointed to herself and said one word: Caraboo. For months, she convinced the British aristocracy that she was a kidnapped princess from a distant island. She was housed in mansions, painted by artists, studied by scholars, celebrated in newspapers. She became a sensation, a mystery, a living exotic fantasy, until someone recognized her, and the entire illusion collapsed. This is the story of Princess Caraboo, the greatest con artist you have never heard of. And the question that still lingers: was she a brilliant performer exploiting prejudice, or a desperate woman doing whatever it took to survive? England, spring 1817, the village of Almondsbury, Gloucestershire, a small rural community southwest of Bristol. April 3rd, evening. A woman appears at the door of a local cobbler named Samuel Worrell. She is in her mid-20s, dark hair tied back, olive complexion, dressed in a black gown with a red and black shawl wrapped around her head in an unfamiliar style. A small bundle of belongings. No money, no identification. She is clearly exhausted, hungry, disoriented. The cobbler's wife tries to speak with her, but the woman does not respond to English. She speaks in a language no one recognizes, fluid, melodic, completely foreign. The sounds are strange, unfamiliar syllables, gestures that seem to mean something but communicate nothing. Mrs. Worrell assumes the woman is a foreign beggar, perhaps French, perhaps Spanish. She gives her bread and water, offers her a place to sleep for the night. But something about the woman is unusual. Her manners, the way she refuses the chair and sits on the floor instead, the way she examines the bread carefully before eating it. She does not behave like a common vagrant. The next morning, Mrs. Worrell takes the woman to the local overseer of the poor. His job is to determine what to do with vagrants and beggars. He questions her in English, then tries a few words of French, Spanish, German, nothing. The woman continues speaking her strange language. She seems frightened, confused. She keeps pointing at herself and repeating a word that sounds like caribou. At one point, she kneels on the ground and begins praying, but not in any Christian manner. She faces a specific direction, bows her head to the ground repeatedly, murmurs words in her incomprehensible language. The overseer does not know what to do with her. She has committed no crime, but she cannot identify herself. She cannot explain where she is from or why she is here. He sends her to the parish workhouse in Bristol, a place for the destitute, for those with nowhere else to go. The workhouse in 1817 England is not a pleasant place. It is overcrowded, cold, designed to deter people from seeking help. But when the woman arrives, something strange happens. She refuses to sleep in the bed provided. She removes the mattress and sleeps on the floor. When the matron tries to correct her, she becomes agitated, insistent. She refuses to eat meat, only vegetables and fruit. She examines her food carefully, rejects certain items. She spends hours staring out the window, pointing at the sky, drawing symbols in the dust on the windowsill. The workhouse overseer is baffled. This is not the behavior of a common vagrant. Vagrants are grateful for beds and food. They do not refuse comfort. They do not have strange customs. Word begins to spread through the village. A foreign woman, speaking an unknown language, with unusual practices. And eventually the story reaches someone with curiosity and resources. Mrs. Elizabeth Worrell, wife of Samuel Worrell, a local magistrate and landowner, a woman of education and means. Mrs. Worrell hears about the mysterious stranger, and she is intrigued. She visits the workhouse to see for herself. What she finds fascinates her. The woman is clearly intelligent. She communicates through elaborate gestures. She draws pictures to explain herself. She has a dignity about her that does not match her circumstances. Mrs. Worrell makes a decision. She will take this woman into her home. She will provide for her, and she will solve this mystery. On April 8, 1817, the mysterious woman is brought to Knoll Park, the Worrell estate, a substantial manor house with servants, grounds, and all the comforts of the British gentry. The woman is given a room, clean clothes, regular meals, and slowly through drawings and pantomime, a story begins to emerge. The woman draws pictures, a large sailing ship, an island with palm trees, armed men with weapons. She points to herself, makes a gesture like a crown on her head, says the word caribou again. Through elaborate mime, she indicates that she was a princess, that she lived on an island far away, that she was kidnapped by pirates, that she was brought to England against her will. She shows how she was taken aboard a ship, how she jumped overboard to escape, how she swam to shore. Mrs. Whirl is captivated, a kidnapped princess from some distant exotic land. It is exactly the kind of romantic mystery that the British upper class adores. This is the age of exploration, of empire. British ships sail to India, the Caribbean, the Pacific. The world is being mapped, categorized, conquered. And with that conquest comes fascination, a hunger for the exotic, for the foreign, for confirmation that the world beyond Europe is full of wonders. Mrs. Whirl begins inviting people to meet the mysterious woman. Scholars, travelers, anyone who might recognize the language she speaks. Several visitors claim to recognize certain words. One man insists he hears traces of Malay. Another claims it might be from the Philippines. A third suggests it could be from Madagascar. No one is certain, but everyone agrees this is definitely a real foreign language. And then comes the breakthrough. A man named Manuel Ineso arrives at Knoll Park. He is Portuguese. He claims to have traveled extensively throughout the East Indies and the Pacific Islands. Mrs. Whirl asks him to listen to the woman speak. He does. He listens carefully, and then he nods. He says he recognizes the language. It is from an island called Yavasu, somewhere in the Indian Ocean, near Sumatra. He says the woman's name is Princess Caraboo. She is royalty from this island. Her story of kidnapping by pirates is true. He even claims to understand some of what she says. He translates fragments, descriptions of her homeland, details about her capture. Mrs. Whirl is thrilled. The mystery is solved. This is not a vagrant or a lunatic. This is a genuine displaced princess, a victim of piracy, a noble woman in need of rescue and restoration. And just like that, Princess Caraboo becomes real. Within days, the story spreads beyond Gloucestershire. Letters are sent to friends in Bath, in London, in Oxford. A foreign princess, living in England, speaking an unknown language, with a dramatic tale of kidnapping and escape. Newspapers pick up the story. First the local Bristol papers, then the London press. By late April 1817, Princess Caraboo is a national sensation. The Bristol Mirror publishes a detailed account. The Bath Chronicle runs illustrations. The London magazines print long articles speculating about her origins. Everyone wants to meet her. Artists want to paint her. Scholars want to study her. Society ladies want to host her. And Caraboo performs beautifully. She maintains her character with absolute consistency. She never speaks English, not once. She communicates only through her invented language and gestures. She demonstrates skills that reinforce her exotic origins. She climbs trees with remarkable agility. She shows proficiency with a bow and arrow. She swims in the estate lake fully clothed, which both scandalized and delighted her audience. Every detail is carefully managed. She prays facing east. She refuses to drink tea, claiming it is against her religion. She shows a particular reverence for pineapples, which she claims are sacred fruit in her homeland. She writes in her invented script. Complex symbols that look vaguely Asian or Arabic, but belong to no known writing system. Artists come to paint her portrait. They depict her in exotic costume, turban, flowing robes, holding a bow, looking noble and mysterious. These portraits are reproduced as prints, sold in shops, distributed across England. Princess Caraboo becomes a commodity, an image, a fantasy made flesh. Scholars study her language. They write papers speculating about its linguistic roots. They compare it to Malay, to Pacific Island languages, to various Asian tongues. No one can definitively place it, but everyone agrees it must be real. The consistency is too perfect, the vocabulary too extensive. What they do not consider is that an intelligent person with a good ear could invent such a language. That someone who had listened carefully to foreign sailors, to Romani travelers, to the polyglot chaos of port towns, could assemble convincing-sounding gibberish. They do not consider this because they do not believe a poor English woman would be capable of such sophistication. And that assumption is Princess Caraboo's greatest weapon. For nearly 3 months, she lives as royalty. She is treated with deference, given the best rooms, dressed in fine clothes borrowed from Mrs. Whirl's wardrobe and altered to seem exotic. She attends dinners, garden parties, social gatherings, always the center of attention, always performing, and she is brilliant at it. She never breaks character. Not when questioned by skeptics, not when tested by scholars, not when observed closely by those trying to catch her in a mistake. She maintains the performance with absolute discipline. But in early June 1817, the illusion begins to crack. Mrs. Neal runs a modest boarding house in Bristol. She caters to travelers, sailors, people passing through the port city. On June 4th, she sees a newspaper. The Bristol Mirror. There is an illustration of Princess Caraboo. Mrs. Neal looks at the drawing, and her heart stops. She recognizes that face. That woman stayed in her boarding house, not as a princess, as a penniless traveler. In December 1816, 6 months earlier, she was not wearing exotic robes. She wore simple English clothes, and she spoke perfect English. Her name was not Caraboo. Her name was Mary Baker. Mrs. Neal is certain. She remembers the woman clearly. She had asked for cheap lodging. She had no money. She was looking for work. Mrs. Neal contacts the authorities. She provides specific details, the dates, the circumstances, a physical description that matches perfectly. The authorities contact Mrs. Whirl. They ask to question the princess. At first, Mrs. Whirl refuses to believe it. This must be a mistake, a case of mistaken identity. But the evidence is compelling. Mrs. Neal is credible. Her details are specific. On June 24th, Princess Caraboo is confronted with the accusation, and the performance ends. She does not fight it. She does not continue the charade. When faced with direct evidence, she confesses. Her name is Mary Baker. She was born in 1791 in Withridge, a village in Devonshire. She is not a princess. She is the daughter of a cobbler, a working-class girl who has spent her adult life in service. Everything was invented. The language, the customs, the story, all of it. The reaction is immediate and brutal. Mrs. Whirl feels profoundly humiliated. She had championed this woman, introduced her to society, vouched for her authenticity. Now she looks like a fool, a gullible, naive fool who was deceived by a common servant. The newspapers that had celebrated Princess Caraboo now turn on her viciously. They call her a fraud, an imposter, a wicked deceiver who manipulated the kindness of her betters. The same society that had been fascinated now demands punishment. She has made them look ridiculous. She has exposed their ignorance, and they want revenge. But here is the interesting legal problem. Mary Baker has not actually broken any laws. She did not steal anything. She did not explicitly ask for money. She did not forge documents or commit fraud in any technical legal sense. She simply performed a character, and people chose to believe her. She accepted hospitality that was freely offered. She did not coerce anyone. She did not threaten anyone. She just spoke gibberish and acted strange, and everyone else filled in the story. The magistrates consult, the lawyers deliberate, and they conclude there is no crime here that can be prosecuted. Mary Baker is guilty of deception, of lying, of making fools of respectable people. But none of that is illegal. Mrs. Whirl is furious, but she is also practical. And perhaps beneath the anger, there is a grudging recognition of what Mary accomplished. She makes a decision. She will not press charges. Instead, she will pay for Mary to leave England entirely. She arranges passage to America. Philadelphia, a fresh start, far from the scandal. Get her out of the country. Let the story fade. Let everyone move on. On June 28, 1817, Mary Baker boards a ship bound for Philadelphia. The newspapers report her departure with contempt. The imposter has been expelled. Good riddance to the deceiver. But they cannot stop writing about her because the story is too fascinating. Who is Mary Baker really, and how did she do it? Mary Baker was born Mary Wilcox in 1791 in Witheridge, Devon. Her father was a cobbler. Her mother worked as a domestic servant. The family was poor but not destitute, working class, struggling. Mary received minimal formal education, perhaps 2 or 3 years of basic schooling, enough to read and write at much, but nothing advanced. By age 15, she was working as a domestic servant. This was the expected path for girls of her class, service in wealthy households. Over the next decade, Mary worked for various families, in Devon, in Somerset, in Bath, in London. She was dismissed multiple times. The reasons vary, sometimes insubordination, sometimes laziness, sometimes theft, though this is disputed. What is clear is that Mary struggled to hold employment. She was intelligent, but she was also difficult. She did not fit the mold of the obedient, invisible servant. At some point, Mary married a man named Baker. He was possibly a fraudster himself. Some accounts suggest he abandoned her. Others suggest she left him. Either way, by 1816, Mary Baker was alone. No family support, no steady employment, no resources. She wandered from town to town, sleeping rough sometimes. In workhouses sometimes, taking temporary work when she could find it. This is when she began experimenting with the performance. She realized something crucial. When she spoke English and identified herself honestly, people dismissed her. She was just another vagrant, another burden on the parish, another mouth to feed begrudgingly. But when she acted strange, when she spoke gibberish, when she seemed foreign and exotic, people were curious instead of contemptuous. They fed her better, housed her more comfortably, treated her with a degree of respect. Because she was no longer just a poor English girl, she was a mystery, a curiosity. And so Mary refined the act. She began constructing the language, listening carefully to foreign sailors in port towns, to Romani travelers, to merchants from the East India Company. She absorbed sounds, patterns, gestures. She practiced in private, building a vocabulary, creating consistent grammatical patterns. She invented the character, Princess Caraboo, a name that sounded exotic but was entirely made up. She created the backstory, the island, the kidnapping, the escape, all designed to explain why she had no documentation, no money, no proof. She developed the customs. The refusal of meat was practical. It gave her control over what she ate and made her seem religiously devout. The prayer rituals facing east borrowed from what she had observed of Muslim and Hindu practices, filtered through her limited understanding. The physical skills, climbing, swimming, archery, were abilities she actually possessed from her rural upbringing. But framed as exotic princess behavior, they became fascinating instead of crude. And then came the masterstroke, Manuel Inesso, the Portuguese traveler who confirmed her language and story. Was he in on the con? Did Mary pay him or promise him something? Or was he simply an opportunist who saw a chance to seem important and well-traveled by claiming knowledge he did not actually have? We will never know for certain. Inesso disappeared from the record after the scandal broke, but his validation was crucial. Once a supposed expert confirmed the story, everyone else fell in line. And for nearly 3 months, Mary Baker lived the performance of her life. When Mary arrived in Philadelphia in July 1817, the scandal had already crossed the Atlantic. American newspapers had picked up the story, the false princess, the great English deception. But American audiences were intrigued rather than outraged. They had no personal investment in the humiliation of British aristocrats. They saw Mary's story as entertaining, even admirable in its audacity. Mary capitalized on this. She began giving public lectures, the true history of Princess Caraboo as told by herself. She performed her invented language, demonstrated her customs, told the story of how she deceived British high society, and people paid to see her. For a while it worked. She made money. She had a brief moment of celebrity, but the novelty wore off quickly. By 1818, American audiences had moved on. There were new scandals, new curiosities. Mary tried other schemes. She claimed to be a fortune teller, a spiritual medium, various other characters. None achieved the success of Princess Caraboo. In 1824, Mary returned to England. The scandal had faded, 7 years had passed, most people had forgotten. She married a man named Richard Baker. Whether this was her first husband or a new marriage is unclear from records. She had a daughter, Mary Ann, born in 1825, and she lived quietly in Bristol, near where the whole thing began. She supported herself by selling leeches. This was a legitimate trade in the 19th century. Medical leeches for bloodletting, a common medical practice. It was humble work, but it was honest. Mary lived this way for 40 years, quietly, unremarkably. She watched her daughter grow up, marry, have children. She grew old in the same city where she had once been celebrated as a princess and condemned as a fraud. In 1864, Mary Baker died. She was 73 years old. Her death was noted briefly in the Bristol Times and Mirror. On the 4th instant, Mary Baker, aged 73, formerly known as Princess Caraboo. No drama, no scandal, just a footnote. She was buried in an unmarked grave. The location is unknown today, but the story did not die with her. Because the story of Princess Caraboo is not really about Mary Baker. It is about everyone who believed her. Why did they believe her? What does that tell us about them? The British aristocracy in 1817 fancied themselves worldly, educated, sophisticated. They collected maps, read travel narratives, attended lectures about distant lands. But their actual knowledge of those places was superficial at best, based on stereotypes, colonial propaganda, and exotic fantasies. They knew that the Orient existed. They knew there were islands in the Pacific. They knew about India and China and the East Indies, but they could not distinguish between them. To them, anything non-European was vaguely the same. Exotic, foreign, other. Mary Baker understood this. She gave them an island that sounded real but could not be verified. Javasu, it could be anywhere. It could be nowhere. And they didn't check. Because checking would have been difficult. It would have required extensive research, correspondence with sailors and merchants, actual expertise. It was easier to believe, more entertaining to believe. She gave them what they wanted, confirmation that the world was full of exotic wonders, that princesses existed in far-off lands, that their charitable instincts were noble and their curiosity justified. And she gave them something else, a living spectacle, an exotic object they could display, study, possess. This is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the story. The British aristocracy did not see Princess Caraboo as a person. They saw her as a curiosity, an entertaining diversion. They studied her language the way they would study a rare bird. They painted her portrait the way they would catalog a botanical specimen. She was an object, a thing to be examined and discussed, and Mary Baker used that objectification to survive. She understood that as a poor Englishwoman, she was invisible, worthless, easily discarded. But as an exotic foreign princess, she had value. She was interesting, she mattered. The performance was not just about deception, it was about claiming humanity. By becoming foreign, she became visible. By becoming exotic, she became worthy of attention. And for 3 months, it worked. The story of Princess Caraboo has been retold many times. In plays, in novels, in academic papers. In 1994, it was adapted into a film. Princess Caraboo, starring Phoebe Cates as Mary and Jim Broadbent as the journalist who exposes her. The film portrays Mary sympathetically, as a clever survivor, a woman using the only weapons available to her, but it also does not shy away from the deception. She lied, she manipulated, she made fools of people. Both things are true. Mary Baker was a con artist, and she was a survivor. And those two identities are not contradictory. The film asks, in a society that gives you no legitimate path to survival, is deception a crime or a necessity? Scholars continue to debate Princess Caraboo. Linguists have analyzed her invented language. They find it impressively consistent. Not random gibberish, but a constructed system with internal logic. Mary created a lexicon of several hundred words. She developed grammatical patterns. She maintained those patterns across weeks of performance. This requires intelligence, memory, discipline. Historians examine the social context, the Regency-era obsession with exoticism, the colonial mindset that made such a deception possible. Feminists analyze the story through the lens of gender and class. Mary had no power in legitimate society, so she created power through performance. All of these readings are valid because the story contains all of these truths. Today you can see the portrait of Princess Caraboo in the Bristol Museum and Art Gallery. It shows a young woman in exotic dress, turban, ornate robes, holding a bow. Her expression is calm, confident, almost regal. The museum placard explains the hoax, tells the basic story, identifies the subject as Mary Baker, an imposter. Tourists look at it, some laugh, some shake their heads at the gullibility of their ancestors, but almost no one asks the question that matters. What does this story tell us about ourselves? We like to think we would not have been fooled. We are too smart, too skeptical, too aware. But the same dynamics that made Princess Caraboo believable in 1817 exist today. We still exoticize the foreign. We still stereotype cultures we do not understand. We still prefer entertaining narratives to complex truths. We still value people based on how interesting or useful they are to us. We still objectify the unfamiliar, and we still make it nearly impossible for certain people to survive legitimately, which means we should not be surprised when they survive illegitimately. Mary Baker understood something profound. Identity is performance. Perception is reality. We are all performing all the time, constructing ourselves for different audiences, emphasizing certain traits, hiding others. Mary simply did it more explicitly, more dramatically, more successfully. She created a character, and for a brief moment, that character was more real than her actual self, because people wanted it to be real, because the fantasy was more appealing than the truth. Princess Caraboo was a lie, but Mary Baker was the truth, a poor woman with no power, no resources, no legitimate options, who looked at a society that had no place for her and said, "Fine, I will create my own place." And she did, with nothing but intelligence, observation, and an extraordinary commitment to performance. She invented a language, a culture, an identity, and she made it real enough to fool scholars, to convince artists, to fascinate an entire nation. For 3 months, Mary Baker was not invisible. She was celebrated. She was somebody. And when the truth came out, the shame belonged not just to her, it belonged to everyone who had been so eager to believe in the exotic fantasy that they never looked closely at the woman standing in front of them. Mary Baker died alone, unmarked, forgotten by most. But her story endures because it asks uncomfortable questions about power, about race, about class, about gender, about who gets to tell their own story and who gets their story told for them, about who is seen as fully human and who is seen as exotic, as other, as object. Mary Baker was a con artist. She lied, she deceived, she manipulated, but she also survived in a world designed to crush women like her. And perhaps that is the most subversive thing she could have done. The greatest trick Princess Caraboo ever pulled was not convincing people she was a princess. It was convincing them she deserved to be treated like a human being, even if she had to invent an entirely new identity to earn that basic dignity. History is full of performers, people who constructed identities to survive, to gain power, to be seen. Some we celebrate as clever, as resourceful, as heroes. Others we condemn as frauds, as liars, as criminals. The difference often comes down to who they were and what they threatened. Mary Baker threatened nothing. She took no power. She stole no fortunes. She harmed no one. She simply performed so well that she revealed the emptiness of the people watching her. At Dark Ages Chronicles, we tell the stories of those who used deception, performance, and sheer intelligence to survive systems designed to erase them. Not to celebrate fraud, but to understand why people become invisible in the first place, and what it costs to be seen. If you want to hear more stories of forgotten tricksters, brilliant survivors, and those who rewrote their own histories against impossible odds, subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories that make you question who really deserves to be remembered, and why we choose to forget the ones who are just trying to survive. This is Dark Ages Chronicles, where the con artists are often more honest than the history books. Thank you for watching.